Welcome to the Attract Your Ideal Clients podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs who sell their expertise, including trainers, consultants, and coaches looking for real world, actionable marketing advice to help them identify their competitive strengths, find and fix the marketing bottlenecks that are holding them back, and confidently make the right marketing decisions for their unique business. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the challenges that many trainers, consultants, and coaches face when transitioning from a corporate career to launching their own business. Joining me today is Liz Weber, Leadership, Strategic, and Succession Planning Consultant. And if you enjoy the show, I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a review. Here we go.
So what I'd like to talk with you today about is specifically the challenges that executives face when they're transitioning out of let's say, a corporate environment, corporate career into consulting, right? And a lot of very unique situations that brings up. And you and I had spoken a few weeks ago about some specific topics we can dive into, but just to frame it for people listening, it's like really kind of some of the special challenges that particular transition brings up. But before we jump into that, just to give people context, can you share a little bit about what you do, kind of problems you solve, and what kind of clients you work with?
Sure, absolutely, Marcus. Happy to. So what I do is I'm a business advisor, an executive coach to primarily three main groups of individuals, to business owners, to the C-suite, but also to boards of directors. And what I do with those three types of leaders is, in a very broad sense, I help them focus on the right things at the right time to get the right impact. Now, that catchy little phrase means what I might do with them are a couple different things. From a organizational perspective, to help them get focus, what they need to do with their organization, I work with them on strategic planning. So I help facilitate their retreats, their work sessions to create strategic plans so that they know where their organization needs to go over the next 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years into the future. As part of those conversations, and Mark, as you can well imagine, as we're talking about how your organization, your company is going to shift, grow, change, whatever into the future, how might it need to be reorganized, and what type of talent do you need to make those things happen? So I spend a good bit of time talking about talent development, workforce development, and leadership succession. So who's going to be doing the job, and then what skills do they have to help them gain the skills that they need to lead the companies they have now and the companies they want in the future. I spend a lot of my time with individuals and sometimes leadership teams or boards in either group coaching, individual coaching, and business advisory services. So talking with them quite often, I just got off a call before you and I jumped on this together. CEO reached out and said, I want to run something by you. You know, something hits his or her desk, and quite often there's not anyone inside that they can talk to them about that issue yet. And quite often I become a first stop for them to vet an idea, to bounce an idea around. Or quite often, in full candor, we're talking about other members of the executive team or other board members to give the chair or the CEO some insight into how to manage those relationships a little bit better, to be more productive. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. I help them figure out, given the issue at hand or given the strategy or given the plan, how do you make it happen? How do you focus on that? And then how might you handle it?
And what you just mentioned too really speaks to what we're going to dive into a bit, which is value. How do you quantify? How do you measure value? And you just mentioned about being a sounding board or being able to bounce ideas. I think sometimes, depending on what type of coaching or consulting one does, it's easy to underestimate the real power of just being present with somebody and helping them work through things and being a sounding board. And I want to kind of put a pin in that for when we talk later about ways that people can really quantify the impact they're having in a client relationship. But I did want to mention that real quick.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit to kind of start us off. we're talking again about the transition that somebody's in there, they've been in a corporate career, traditional corporate career, whatever that means these days, right? And they are retired maybe, or they've been let go, unfortunately, whatever the circumstances, they just decide they want to go off their own. Can you give us an overview of what you've seen maybe personally for your own career or people that your own peers have gone through as they transition that you think are some of the big kind of challenges that they've faced, which primarily always comes down to building the business, right? Bringing in new clients. For the most part, if you can bring in clients, most of the other problems are pretty easy to figure
Mhm.
out, right? So just kind
Mhm.
of walk us through that a little bit.
Well, it kind of circles back to what you alluded to. The biggest challenge for someone leaving a corporate position or a full-time position into stepping out into their own arena as a consultant is figuring out what the heck value do I add? What do I do? And it's really hard to hone in on what value do I bring to someone that's going to be of significant value that they're willing to pay for it, that they can't do for themselves. So one of the things that I do is get real clear in there are different ways you can add value when you are a consultant. You can add value first by helping a client make money or save money. Okay, so you can identify efficiencies, you can identify waste, you can identify pricing enhancement, cost reduction mechanisms, whatever. You can help them make money or save money. Number one way to help a client. The number two way to help a client is you can provide insight and information. You're basically a subject matter expert. You might be able to give them insights into cyber, into risk, into a conversation I had yesterday, board governance. How does that look? How do you structure your board? So you might be a subject matter expert and you just save them a ton of time by being a resource for them to say, no, 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 Marcus, don't do that. Do this, and this instead. And you're like, oh, thank you. You just saved me a ton of time. The third way I find that I can add value to clients is providing them relief. And what I mean by that is somewhat what you just alluded to is I can't tell you the number of times where I've had a client say something along the lines of, I can't talk to anybody else about this. I can't talk to anybody here about this. Or I just need to run this by you and tell me if I'm crazy or not. To just be a sanity check. And quite often I'm not saying a whole lot. I'm just listening and saying, you're not crazy. That's a crazy situation. Um, so I share those as three zones of potential value because how you then frame it up, it helps you determine the type of individual or companies you want to work with as a consultant. It tells you obviously the products or service lines that might fit into that. Um, and it gives you a sense of confidence that you obviously, I would hope, have the ability and the skill sets to deliver in one, if not all three of those ways.
Now, I love the way you articulated that in such clear categories, if you will, right?
Mhm.
And as a marketing person, right, one of the first things, for better or worse, that I go to is how does one articulate their value in a way that's not a conversation? And the reason what I mean by that is if you're leaving a corporate position and you're going to go into consulting and you have a very deep network of people that you can jump on a Zoom call or have coffee with and explain in detail all the things you can help with, but you're engaged in a conversation. You can find out what that person's struggling with and figure out maybe you can help them. That's a very flexible way to be able to start building your client base. And I would guess that's how a lot of people get their start, right?
Mhm.
They're going to, hey, let's get some coffee. I'm going to tell you what I'm doing. And they're able to get some momentum that way, which is beautiful. The challenge I see that a lot of people run into is how do I articulate this on my website? How do I
Mhm.
articulate this on my LinkedIn? Because it's very hard to pick one. It's very hard to say this is the relief I'm giving people. This is
Mhm.
how I do it. So what happens is and it's not all the time, but I'm seeing this as just kind of an overall trend where you have somebody that leaves a corporate position, they have their first clients and they're up and running and oh, beautiful, right? But at some point, unless they're very aggressive in their building their, their network and growing their network, at some point that well runs dry.
Mhm.
And now maybe they've gone through their first big engagements and they need to figure out how to start building their pipeline. Now they're at a point where their website or whatever their outward facing, prospect facing messaging is now very generic, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know if any of this is my position on, this is my impression of it. Does that resonate with you at all as being kind of a core issue?
Absolutely. And the key thing here, Marcus, again, is getting really clear, and it's not easy to do, but get really clear on really what is the value you provide, or to say it another way, what is the problem or issue you help alleviate for them? Okay? That's pretty standard information for any consultant. You need to be able to answer that question. But to get to how do I start creating a pipeline, what has worked well for me is because I really understand my client base and I understand the issue that they have that I solve, whether it's strategic planning or succession planning, or they need more depth in their leadership team. I have a pretty good understanding after my initial conversation with them, and certainly by the time I'm engaged with them after the second or third interaction with them, I know what has gotten them to this point, and I know what's going to come next. Meaning, once I help them with the current issue they have, nothing's going to be perfect after that. There's going to be another issue. So for my line of services, what I've done is I've kind of created a cyclical offering. Okay. What I mean by that is historically, when I first started my company was a training company. I trained managers, everything from time management to project management. And then I started getting pulled into consulting and project work. And what I found out when they wanted me to train managers, the problem they had was the managers, yeah, they needed some training. But the real problem, Marcus, was the managers didn't know what kind of company they were supposed to lead and what goals they were supposed to be working towards. They didn't have a strategic plan. And so I branched out and saying, look, the training programs that I'm offering can be so much more effective if your team has a clear strategic plan that you're all aligned to work together. And my clients started going, well, that's a great idea. Can you help us with that? Well, yes, I can. Yes, let's make something happen. So in the strategic planning sessions, part of the conversation is in year 3, 5, and 10, these changes are going to happen internally. Who's going to run that? Who's going to be able to do that? Well, that obviously segues into succession and workforce planning. That's going to be a next project. Once we figure out who's going to be in those seats, they need training or coaching to get their skill set up to where it needs to be. So I am now in this cyclical process of a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically, of you need training, you need a plan, you need succession and team depth. You need training, you need a plan, and it feeds itself. So I share that because that has allowed me to do two things. Number one, keep my pipeline filled. But number two, in my case and my preference, I have really long-term client retention and I have long-term engagements. So I don't need 197 clients. I can do with far fewer because I have longer engagements with them. So I just share that as food for thought for your listeners when, when they're looking to fill a pipeline, so they don't get stuck in a situation that I've experienced where you're doing, and I hate the term gig work, but you're doing a project, then it's hunting for the next project. You're doing a project, you're hunting for the next project. That's really exhausting and that's really inefficient and very expensive. And so I believe the more you know about your client and the issue you solve, put a pin in it, and then identify what problems got to them to this point, And after we fix the current problem, what's the next problem going to be? Because when you can say, hey, Marcus, we're making great progress on this now. We need to have a conversation about X, Y, and Z because it's probably going to happen within the next 6 months. And then when it starts to happen, you think I'm brilliant because I anticipated something was going to happen.
You were brilliant because you anticipated something was going to happen. And what I hear from all that too is that it's an evolution, right? You
Mhm.
mentioned what you started doing, and I'm sure that's you still maybe do some of that or all of it, whatever. But it's something that I'm guessing you couldn't have figured out ahead of time, right? It had to
Mhm.
come through experience of working with people, seeing trends, seeing certain themes of opportunities. And it also speaks to very nicely to when I try to advise clients to one of the biggest challenges they have when it comes to messaging, right? I mentioned before website. Website is just kind of like the catch-all for what are you saying about what you do, right?
Mhm.
Because most people are going to have something on a website. The challenge a lot of people have is, well, I can do all these things, like just what you just mentioned. I could do
Mhm.
this and I could do that. I'm like, great. The hard part is not that you can do all those things. The hard part is how do you articulate in that in a way that isn't just overwhelming, that isn't
Mhm.
just a laundry list of stuff on a website, because then you're just basically just stuff at a wall, right?
Right.
And one way one solution to that is where you have this kind of tip of the spear problem that you focus on. And you didn't mention it that way, but I imagine what you just said as being there is this initial strategy alignment problem. But you know for yourself that that can lead to all these other things. And once you're in the room with people, once you
Mhm.
engage them and have a relationship, now you can have all those conversations. And
Right.
now you can discover all those other pain points. But when you have something that is easy for strangers to understand the value of, to get in the door, to
Mhm.
open the conversation, because that's 99% of it. How do you get the
Right.
conversations going?
Right.
So it just is one for listeners or even just for you, if that resonates of like, yeah, here's a practical way to take all these capabilities and how to start somewhere so you can at least get that conversation going.
Well, and I'll just add to that, it's what do you want to be known for? Because to your point, if you've got a list of, 27 different things that you can do, and we all can do that 27 different things, but that just becomes a blur to someone looking for someone who can help them with X. And the best piece of advice I learned 20 something years ago when I was writing one of my books that I've applied across the board and has been just a godsend for my business. When I was writing one of my books, a very well-known author shared a piece of advice, and she said, whatever you write about, make sure that you want to be known for that, because if that book hits, you're going to be talking about that for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, possibly. And I was
You're
like,
lucky. That's the hope, right? That you're talking
that's
about
the
that for
hope.
five.
But here's the thing, I had just written a book that I thought was just going to be a fun little book. And I went, no, I don't want to be known for that. So I share that story because the thing that I also found when I think about strategic planning and when I work with clients on strategic planning, I'm a weirdo because I can be working with a client for an entire day at a retreat, and at the end of the day, I have as much, if not more, energy than when I started. It feeds me. I love it. So I say that because on my laundry list of things I do, change management's one of them. But if a client reaches out and says, we would like you to help with a change initiative, can you help with that? Yeah, of course I can. But where my head immediately goes, because I know myself, because I've done this before, if I'm only part of the change implementation, what's driving that change? It's because of a strategic initiative. And if that strategic initiative doesn't make sense, this change isn't going to work. So I know for myself and the way that I work and how I can best help my client, I've got to be on the front end. I've got to figure out what's driving this change. And then I can certainly help with a change implementation. But again, it goes to my point earlier is I am so in tuned of where's your current problem? what got you here and what's going to happen next. Because if you pull in me for a change initiative that's being driven by a less than effective plan, you're going to have major issues down the line. So let's correct this right away.
And to go back to what you said before about energy, at the end of a long day, imagine a long day, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you hear retreat, it's not, it's work, right?
It's work.
It's
Yeah.
work and it's a long day. What do you do where at the end of that day, yeah, you're tired, but you're buzzing, right? You
Mm-hmm.
still want to do it. I That is something that I really want to highlight because I think that's lost on a lot of people. When somebody specifically, we're talking again about this transition out of corporate to consulting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this applies to anybody wanting to go into training, coaching, consulting from any position, right? But all these things they can do, and it's overwhelming. Oh, I could do this. I could work with these people, whatever. One way to really start to narrow down your options is the classic cliche, what's your passion? And I know that some people hate that and some
Mm-hmm.
people love it, but ultimately, if you're going to build a business, not only are you going to write a book about it, maybe you better really love what you're writing about because
Mm-hmm.
writing a book takes a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be working with people for full days or weeks at a conference or at a retreat. You're going to need to recreate content about it. You're going to want to go on podcasts. You're going to want to start your own podcast, whatever it is. You're going to be talking about this thing a lot. If
Mm-hmm.
you're not really into it, A, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to show. B,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to hate what you're doing because you're going to
Mm-hmm.
wish you had the corporate gig again, right?
Right.
So it doesn't mean that, that's the only part of the equation because yes, there has to be a market for it. But I think what a lot of people struggle with is they're not asking themselves, what would I want to do all day? They're asking themselves, where's the blue ocean, right?
Right.
Where's the big opening in the thing? And so that's why you're seeing a lot of people who are suddenly AI and ChatGPT experts after like they're the experts. Really? Okay, are you really into that? Or are you doing this because you think this is the gold rush now?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe both. But I just wanted to mention that. I think that's such an important part of this equation.
Well, and if I could just add to that, when you say, what are you passionate about? I differentiate that between that and your passion because a passion, you don't get paid for that. But what are you passionate about that solves a problem or fills a need for someone who's willing to pay? That's huge because that differentiates again what you go after versus what you think is going to add value to the world. And there's two different things. The other item that I wanted to also add to this though is when you're looking at what you are passionate about, what I've experienced time and time again, and this is where all of a sudden when a client asked me to do strategic planning, I didn't know what I was doing. I just did what I thought would make sense for me. If I was one of the people in that room, how would I want this to go? When I realized when I was facilitating that activity, what was happening in real time was the same thing that had happened in the training room quite often. I would just say things that would come out of my mouth, and I'd be like, "Wow, I do know this. I
Are
this
brilliant.
this well not I'm just like I guess this I get this. It just makes sense." And so I share that with your listeners because when you think about the value you bring and the services that you want to offer, what can you just naturally do well that you can just talk about it and the content, the information, the guidance, the ramifications. It may be something incredibly boring to other people, but if there's a need for it, if there's value, and you're the person that can make all the connections, that's your thing. And there's probably a market out there for it. You just got to find it.
Especially the more boring it is to other people, right? If they
Yeah,
love doing it,
yeah.
they probably don't need to do it. I love that too that you said that because when I think of that, first of all, to the whole idea of passion, I think one of the things that makes me a little bit of a weirdo too is that when I think about my passions, they almost always are around problems that I love solving.
Hmm.
And by definition, for the most part, problems that you like solving have some value to other people. So I generally think of passions in the sense of some kind of business context, right?
Right.
So, not somebody like, I love, whatever, knitting, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, you could sell it, but it's a different kind of thing. And
If
then,
I could, if I could just add though
yeah.
too, it's you need to get specificity behind what you're passionate about. Again, what problem does it solve for either a business or an individual that they're going to hire you? And I just say that because I was on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the person that was interviewing me said something along the lines of, yes, my passion is to help people create more fulfillment in their world. And I was like, what does that mean? How do you do that? I don't know what that is. So I need something more specific into what is the actual outcome and benefit that you help generate for the individual that saves money, makes money, provides insight, or provides relief. What value do you offer?
Can you say again what that description was? Because I don't want to butcher it, but I want to go back to that for a second.
The
This
three,
person's
the three ways you add value.
no, 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 no. What this individual has just said, I want to help people. What was it that you just said?
It was something along the lines of, I want to help people, find fulfillment in creating, I don't know, creating a greater community. Or it was something fluffy. I don't know. And it was well intended, but it's no different than when I work with clients and we're working on articulating their vision. I was like, specifically, a vision is an image, a picture. What do you want to see at the end of this in your mind's eye? If you want to say, we want to create, great experiences for our clients that, surpass everybody out there in the, marketplace. Okay, what do I do with that? Do
What does
we
that
do we high
mean?
five each other? But I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. So I'm looking for specificity.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted to kind of drill down on this a little bit is because now we're getting as far again as a marketer, now we're getting into like boots on the ground, brass tacks, whatever cliche I
Mhm.
can throw out there. This is what I see so often. That fluffy kind of I help people, reach their highest potential. Let's just say that as
Right.
what you achieve your highest potential or some version of that. That's the big message on their website that, and
Mm-hmm.
then they just are kind of say that in 17 different ways throughout the
Right.
homepage, right? And it's not untrue. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that's not an important aspect of what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or drives you. But the problem is when somebody's going to your website, your LinkedIn, they're meeting you for the first time at an event, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost meaningless
Right.
because it's like saying, I help people be happier.
Right.
Okay, cool. Well, I like chocolate. That makes me happy, right? Do you sell chocolate? No, So it's like as opposed to where, I don't want to bring up examples because I'm probably going to, mash them up. But when you're saying we help this particular type of company or this particular type of person solve this particular problem so that they can some outcome. Oh, total difference. Now, 99% of the people that come across that accidentally will not care a bit about it. But the
Mm-hmm.
1% or 5% or 10% or however efficient you are reaching your target audience, that really is like they fall in that, you've got their attention, right?
Right.
And yes, ultimately, what drives that is happiness and fulfillment and potential, but it has to go the whole thing isn't about just how we word it to ourselves, is how are we communicating this to the people who we want to ask for money from,
Right.
because
Right.
that changes everything, right?
That changes everything. And in a way that I look at it also is, what would you say to someone if you were trapped in the elevator with them? Do you want them to go, oh, okay, and then they turn and they start looking at the buttons, hoping they can push the net button to get off? Or do you want them to go, really? Well, that sounds really interesting. And they actually get it, you know? And so it's again, it goes back to um, What's the value you provide? What's the benefit you offer? What's the problem you help solve? That people go, no, I know, I can envision how that would be helpful to somebody. Because the key thing, like you said, is you want somebody to ultimately hear it and go, hey, I know I need you to talk to somebody, or can I call you? That could be helpful. If they don't get it, they won't call you. And so
That's
you gotta make
okay.
it simple. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, not if they don't get it because you're being vague, that's not okay. But
Right.
if they are not your ideal client type, that's fine.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
totally cool.
Yep.
Um, and this is now, getting into, for somebody listening who's in this position, right? And it's like, okay, that's all makes sense. But the problem is I still am not sure what I want to do. So I want to keep my options open. I want to be able to go to events. I want to be able to meet people and keep everything kind of generic because I never know when I'm going to run into somebody who might need whatever I do, and I don't know what that is yet. Here's the thing we were talking about before to keep in mind is that it can evolve. If you start with something, you can
Mhm.
always adapt it. You can always iterate. You're not making this decision for the rest of your life. And what that does for you is now you can actually you can get proactive about stuff. And that's
Mhm.
where I wanted to kind of, as we start to wind down, to talk about this difference between, I go to some events and I meet people and I tell them how I'm not trying to sell anything and I just want to get to know them and all that beautiful stuff. But winds up like you're months later, you still don't have any clients or whatever, you're not really growing anything. Versus I know who I serve. I know the problems I solve. I know how to find them because we have LinkedIn and I can find anybody on the planet. Right.
Mhm.
So if you can kind of like as we start to wind down, walk us through what that difference looks like for you, how you've seen that make a difference in your peers' careers, like just how important that might be.
It's critical. And it's critical for all the steps that you just identified. Um, it's critical in understanding, we go back to what problems do you like to solve that you know you can provide a tangible difference? Number one, get clear on that. Number two, identify, are you going to be a B2B or a B2C provider? Because there's a very big difference in whether you're business to business or you're business to individual consumer. And the reason I say that is I knew the difference, but I wasn't clear in limiting who I was getting information from early in my business. And I was following some marketing tactics for B2C when I should have been B2B. And so that's a big difference. And tying into that, the third thing that has helped me is get very clear on the ideal demographic of the type of either business or individual that you want to provide your services to. What industry, what size organization, what's the makeup? In my particular situation, when I started my training company, I was supervisors and managers. They pulled me into senior level management that pulled me into boards, to your point. So where right now is your known success? Where do you have contacts? Where can you provide services that just hit it out of the park because you've got the content, you know the material? Start there, get your feet wet, and then as you start to stabilize and figure out, I don't really want to go down this path, or I want to go into this area a little bit more. To your point, Mark, is then you can always expand, you can change, you can shift. But until you start getting some clarity, if you're not already completely clear, I think those are some really important first steps.